Hello everyone and welcome to Ask Better Questions, the podcast where we delve into the nuances of leadership and personal development. I'm your host Peter, and today we're going to discuss the Greek proverb, "A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they'll never sit." So for those of you who are new here, I'm Peter Adams. I have over 20 years experience in leadership and consulting. I'm a published author and a speaker in the leadership space, and my mission is to help excellent leaders become exceptional leaders through better mindset. But before we start today's episode, I'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Colour4 Solutions. So for those of you who are here regularly, you'd know Colour4 Solutions offer leadership training for people who have reached a ceiling in their leadership journey and want to achieve more without dedicating substantial time and effort. So, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they shall never sit. Why is this something we should be focusing on at all? Well, this proverb applies to leadership. It captures the essence of building a sustainable and thriving organization, which is quite topical in today's leadership. And I guess there's a few things that translate this into leadership actions. The first amongst them being long-term vision. Great leaders prioritize the future, even if the benefits won't be reaped during their tenure. They plant seeds for a stronger organization that will flourish for generations. Now, this could involve investing in employee development. It could involve establishing a strong company culture or focusing on environmental responsibility. A lot of what I see that passes for leadership at the moment is, for sure, it is a quasi-leadership, but it's not looking at a long-term function. Most of what passes for leadership at the moment in most Fortune 500 companies is for 12, at best, 24 months. Sometimes they may even claim to have a 5-year plan, but very rarely do these 5-year plans actually live out, and very rarely are they followed. They may have a strategic plan that lasts for 5, 10, 15 years even. But in terms of most Fortune 500 companies are working quarterly to nail figures, and they're just existing to hit their numbers each quarter so that their management team can keep their jobs. Now, it'd be nice if they have the long-term vision, that's for sure, but they are not focused on the long-term vision at all costs. It's very much, I must hit my figures so that I can achieve my long-term vision. And that's fine to a degree, but if you fail to meet your numbers, are you then going, but at least I achieved my long-term vision, or I'm closer to achieving my long-term vision? And is that acceptable? I will get into that further and in more detail later on in this episode, but to my mind, one of the reasons why leadership is not as strong as it should be is because true leaders, true passionate long-term leaders of organizations are not at all attracted to business, because the business at the moment, as it stands due to capital restraints, is very much completely focused on just achieving quarterly numbers. That said, focusing on legacy is the next point that would come from this Greek proverb. Effective leaders understand that the role of shaping the organization's future, you have to strive to leave a positive legacy, not just a short-term series of wins. I don't see a great number of leaders achieving long-term visions or leaving lasting legacy at organizations. There are those that stand out, people like Steve Jobs, who are leaving a long-term legacy that is Apple. Apple is the long-term legacy of Steve Jobs, and so be it. But there's very few organizational leaders that could claim the same. Microsoft is certainly not Bill Gates' legacy. Bill Gates is doing other things to establish his legacy. If anything, it's Steve Ballmer's legacy. But there's a number of organizations that you can point to and say, yes, that is definitely this particular CEO's legacy is this organization. But not as many as you'd think. And to be honest with you, most of them, most household names and most leaders in the business space will be forgotten within a generation or two. You very rarely have a Dale Carnegie or a Rockefeller that from our current generations. I believe that you'll probably find those people that are making the most longest lasting impact are the likes that are going to get us to space. But I digress. Bringing it back here, selfless decision making. So from this proverb, you can see that great leaders make choices that benefit the collective good. So even if it requires personal sacrifice, they understand that true leadership isn't about immediate gratification. It's about building something lasting. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine who has sold their business. In fact, they took their business public and ended up buying it back. So they were relaying this story to me. And we were discussing capital markets and how they had an offer of $250 million on the table, and they didn't sell their business for that money. They instead listed it on the stock exchange for about 4 times that. And then the share price went up and the share price went down and the like. But part of that was they still maintained about 40% of the business, but they couldn't sell those shares for 6 months. And part of the listing on the stock exchange required themselves to step back as CEO, as a founder, and let somebody else run the business. And that was fine. So they stepped back before the IPO happened. New CEO took over. This person stepped away. And within a month, they had managing directors and CEOs on the phone saying, hey, please come back because we need you to sort this out. So they've come back to the business. They've watched the share price gradually go down after spiking after the IPO. And they've been losing a great deal of money. And so they've stepped back in, assisted the business, got it back on track, and then stepped away and just took up a board position. Now, the problem that this CEO was telling to me was when they were the CEO, they were able to manage the business. They knew what they were doing. They were the founder. They knew various things about the business. When you have a CEO appointed by people that don't necessarily know about the business, all they're looking for is a capital return, they generally go for grey-haired older men. And this was a tech business, and it needed a startup entrepreneur. And grey-haired older men weren't what was necessarily needed. Now, that's not to say that grey-haired older men can't do this. I am very rapidly becoming a grey-haired older man. And having run tech businesses, I felt a little bit affronted, but I let him go. And so he continued to tell his story and basically said, when it comes down to it and they needed to make a decision, do we want to save the business and fire the CEO, or do we want to keep the share price artificially up because the share price is now trending up with this CEO, and if we fire the CEO, we risk losing the share price? Well, everyone on the board was appointed by people that want to sell their shares. So it was entirely a situation where everyone on the board said, we're not going to fire the CEO, even though it's the best outcome for the company, and actually get a CEO that's correct for the company or correct fit. So the CEO was safe, not by virtue of the fact that they were competent, or even they were going to get competent, but rather the share price would suffer if they lost their job. And that was the only reason they were being kept there. Not because they knew what they were doing, not because it was great for the business, not because it was going to help the business long or short term. And that's an absurd situation, and this person pointed that out. But in today's capital market, not having good leadership on at your business is not seen as a bad thing. Having the same leadership is seen as a good thing, regardless of whether that leadership is good, bad, or otherwise. And that is an indictment on the current capital markets. And I said as much to this person, and they agreed. It turns out that 5 years after they launched the IPO, this person has purchased the entire company back for a very, very small sum, and now runs it quite profitably. When he purchased the business back, it had several $100 million in carried forward losses after 5 years. And it had always been profitable. So it launched an IPO on a profitable company, and bought it back 5 years later as it was making losses after loss after loss, and has carried forward losses, which means that he can continue to make profits now, has made an absolute ton out of it. But it is very much, you still need to have the right people in the right places in order to be able to get the right capital returns. And capital returns in this instance were viewed by the investors as just being a share price return, not necessarily actually operating the capital effectively. And that is just, it's very puzzling to a person such as myself who goes, doing the right thing is always the right thing to do, as one of my mentors says. This just doesn't seem to be a very good way of running your business. And selfless decision-making came up because he was saying, if you knew you needed to fire someone, or even better, if you knew you needed to leave the business. And he said there were at least 3 occasions in the business's life cycle where he was put on the spot and he needed to make a call. He needed to know whether he was going to stay with the business or not. And he said, the first one I stayed with the business and I made the right call. The second one I stayed with the business. That was the wrong call. And the third one, I left the business. And the third one was when the CEO was supported by the board of directors, and he just went, no, I can't stay on the board. I'm walking away from the company. And he did. And in the end, he ended up going back to the company, buying it, taking it private again. And and the rest is history. He's still operating it to this day. But if you need to make a selfless decision and you needed to say, it's the company or it's me, and it came down to that, would you step away from your job? Would you, for lack of a better term, quit to save the company? Would you quit to save your team? Or are you that attached to your role? Would you stand down? Would you let somebody else lead? Because that is the sign of a true leader, being able to make selfless decisions. I've had the privilege of working with some military people who have said to me, if somebody comes in and they are better than me at leading, they lead. That's it. I'm fine with that. Why? Because I am going to be their number 2. I'm going to sit very close to them and I'm going to learn everything they know. Then I'm going to know everything I know and everything they know. And then I will be leading again. And that's how leaders work. They go around, they learn as much as they can. And if somebody knows more than them, they lead. That's fine. But if you're not willing to make those selfless decisions and you're not willing to make those, then you're not a leader. You're a person that wants to be in charge. So there are a few more points I wanted to make today. Investing in the future stems from, this Greek proverb does talk about planting trees. It symbolizes investing in a long-term project, something that's going to, an initiative that may not yield immediate results, but great leaders allocate resources for growth, innovation, employee well-being, knowing that these investments will benefit the future. Some of them will pay off in some degree in the short term, but most of them will only pay off in the long term. And those decisions are still good decisions to make and necessary. They're what Stephen Covey would call important, not necessarily urgent, but important. And if you only do the urgent things because they've got to get done this quarter, then you're not focusing at all on the important things. And the important things, when they're neglected, end up being problems because then they become urgent and important. And that is what Stephen Covey calls problems. You don't want to be focusing on urgent and important tasks because that's management by putting out fires. And we've all seen organizations that try to manage by putting out fires. And, obviously I've referenced this recently, but Boeing seems to be trying to put out a lot of fires at the moment. And that is not because they have been doing the important stuff. It's because they've just been focusing on what's urgent, or they haven't been doing anything in relation to the important stuff, which is managing their quality and understanding what's involved in that. So inspiring action also comes from this proverb. And The proverb serves as a powerful call to action. So it should encourage you to inspire and motivate others to contribute to the organization's long-term success. Planting trees together, the organization becomes a collaborative effort focused on a shared future. So if you're planting trees in your organization, everyone in the organization knows you're here for the long term, and you may not realize the benefits of everything that you're doing, but you are focused not on immediate gratification. And that's something that everyone can get on board with. It's not always easy to focus on the long term, especially with pressures for short-term gains. Leaders face resistance from those who prioritize immediate results, like those in capital markets. Additionally, ensuring long-term plans are followed through on by future leadership requires clear communication and a strong organizational culture that carries forward that, yes, we have been doing all of these things to lay the groundwork so that future leaders can capitalize on it and actually steer the organization towards the wind. And yes, it's tough going, but it needs to be done. So in conclusion, the proverb offers valuable guidance for leaders who want to build a truly great organization. So if you're one of those, you should be printing that out and framing it in your office. By prioritizing the long-term focus on legacy and making selfless decisions, leaders can plant the seeds for a sustainable and thriving future. So I'm going to leave it there. That's it for today's episode of Ask Better Questions. I hope you found the insights that we discussed today valuable and actionable. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, like and subscribe. But more importantly, share it with someone you feel needs to hear this. I'll be back next week with more. Until then, keep asking better questions. And remember, leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. Take care, and we'll see you back here next week.